The coffee spilled across her blazer at 8:47 in the morning, and Maria Santos was certain that her entire career had just ended in that single, scalding moment. She had been rushing toward the elevator, balancing a tray of cups for the executive meeting she was catering, when she collided with a man kneeling beside a flickering ceiling light in the lobby of Whitmore Tower. He wore faded jeans, a gray work shirt with a company logo half peeled off, and steel-toed boots scuffed from years of labor. Coffee soaked through his shirt, and Maria's stomach dropped as she imagined the cost of replacing the executive coffee order. The time she'd lose, the impression she'd make on only her third week at this prestigious catering contract. She apologized frantically, grabbing napkins from her cart, dabbing at his shoulder while he simply laughed it off and told her not to worry, that he'd seen worse spills in his line of work. His eyes were kind, tired in the way that spoke of someone who worked. Long hours, and his voice carried no irritation, only a strange, gentle patience that made her wonder, even then, who this man really was. If this story moves you, even a little, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness, share it with someone who needs reminding that good people still exist, and subscribe to this channel because we believe deeply in stories about kindness, dignity, and the second chances life sometimes quietly offers us when we least expect them. Maria had worked her way up from nothing, raised by a single mother in a cramped apartment in Queens. She had spent her childhood watching her mother clean office buildings at night while attending community college during the day, determined to give Maria something better. Maria had inherited that same relentless work ethic, putting herself through culinary school while working 3 jobs, eventually landing a position as an event coordinator for Premier Catering Services. The company contracted to handle corporate functions for Whitmore Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in the state. The job paid decently, but more than that, it represented hope, a foothold into a world she had only watched from the outside her entire life, a world of polished marble floors, glass elevators, and people who spoke in the confident language of those who had never worried about making rent. The man with the coffee-stained shirt introduced himself simply as Daniel. He worked maintenance, he said, fixing whatever broke in the building, from flickering lights to jammed printers to leaking pipes in the executive bathrooms. Over the following weeks, Maria found herself running into Daniel more often than seemed possible in a building of 40 floors. He'd be repairing a vending machine when she wheeled her cart past for a morning meeting, or replacing ceiling tiles in the conference room, where she was setting up lunch trays. Each time, he greeted her with the same warm, unhurried smile, asking about her day as though he genuinely wanted to know the answer, which was a rarity in a building full of people who walked past service staff as though they were furniture. Their conversations grew longer. Daniel had a way of listening that made Maria feel, for the first time in years, truly seen. She told him about her mother's illness, the diabetes that had worsened over the past year, the medical bills piling up faster than her paychecks could cover them. She told him about her dream of one day opening her own small catering business, something modest but entirely hers, a dream she had nearly buried under the weight of survival. Daniel listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and occasionally offered quiet observations about business and finance that struck her as unusually sharp for a maintenance worker. Though she never thought much of it at the time, she assumed he simply read a lot, or had perhaps once dreamed of something bigger himself, the way so many working people did before life narrowed their options. There was a tenderness growing between them that neither acknowledged directly. Maria found herself looking forward to seeing his toolbox parked outside some office door, found herself saving him a pastry from the catering trays when there were extras, found herself laughing more freely in his presence than she had in months. Daniel, for his part, began arriving earlier to the floors where she typically worked, finding small reasons to linger near her cart, asking if she needed help carrying anything heavy. It was a quiet, unspoken connection built in stolen 5-minute conversations between tasks, in the kind of glances that say more than words ever could. But Maria's world was not without its cruelties. The catering contract was managed by a woman named Vivian Cross, the events director for Whitmore Industries, a sharp-tongued woman who treated the catering staff with barely concealed contempt. Vivian seemed to delight in finding fault with Maria's work, criticizing presentation choices, questioning her competence in front of other executives, and once even suggesting that Maria was too familiar with building staff, a comment dripping with classist disdain that left Maria's cheeks burning with humiliation. Vivian made it clear in the careful, deniable way that powerful people often do that Maria's position was precarious. That one more mistake could mean the end of her contract entirely. The pressure mounted as the company prepared for what insiders were calling the most important week in Whitmore Industries' recent history. Rumors swirled through the building that the current CEO, an aging man named Richard Whitmore, who had built the company from his father's small manufacturing shop into a billion-dollar enterprise, was finally stepping down. Speculation ran wild about who would replace him, with some betting on an outside hire, others insisting the board would promote from within. Maria heard fragments of these conversations as she set up trays in conference rooms, the kind of high-stakes corporate gossip that meant nothing to her beyond the fact that she would be catering whatever celebration or transition meeting followed. 3 days before the announcement, Maria's mother was rushed to the hospital. The diabetes had triggered a severe complication, and Maria found herself sitting in a sterile waiting room at 2 in the morning, exhaustion and terror mixing into a nauseating cocktail as doctors moved in and out of her mother's room with grim expressions. She had no one to call. Her father had left when she was 4, and her mother's siblings lived too far away to help in any immediate way. She sat alone, gripping a paper cup of vending machine coffee, feeling the full weight of her isolation pressing down on her chest, like a physical thing. It was Daniel who showed up at 6 that morning, having heard from a coworker that Maria had called in sick to her shift, worried because she never missed work. He found her in the hospital waiting room, hollow-eyed and trembling, and without a word he simply sat beside her, offering his presence rather than empty reassurances. He stayed for hours, bringing her actual food instead of vending machine snacks, listening as she finally broke down and cried, releasing years of accumulated fear and exhaustion she had never allowed herself to express. He held her hand, and in that sterile, fluorescent-lit room, surrounded by the antiseptic smell of crisis, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years, the sensation of not being entirely alone in the world. Her mother stabilized by that evening, though the doctors warned that ongoing care would be expensive and essential. Maria returned to work 3 days later, drained but grateful, only to find the building buzzing with an energy she didn't understand. Employees clustered in hallways, whispering, checking their phones, glancing toward the executive floor, with expressions of shock and disbelief. Vivian Cross intercepted Maria near the elevator, her face pale and strangely deferential, in a way Maria had never witnessed before, instructing her with unusual politeness that the Monday board meeting required the finest presentation Premier Catering could offer, that everything needed to be absolutely perfect, because the new CEO would be making his first official appearance. Maria spent the weekend preparing obsessively, partly to distract herself from her mother's medical bills, and partly because some instinct told her this assignment mattered more than she understood. She arrived at 6 on Monday morning, hours before the meeting, setting up an elaborate spread in the main boardroom on the 40th floor, a room she had only glimpsed before through glass walls, never having been trusted to work inside it directly. The room itself felt like a monument to power, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a table of dark polished wood stretching the length of the room, and portraits of the Whitmore family lining the walls like silent judges. At exactly 9 o'clock, the boardroom doors opened, and board members began filing in, followed by Vivian Cross, who shot Maria a final warning glance to ensure everything appeared flawless. Maria stood near the side table, ready to serve coffee the moment it was requested, her heart pounding with nerves despite having done this hundreds of times before. Then the doors opened once more, and the room fell into a hush so complete that Maria could hear her own pulse in her ears. Daniel walked in, but this was not the Daniel she knew. Gone were the faded jeans and work boots, replaced by a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that fit him with the precision of someone accustomed to such attire, though he wore it without arrogance, almost as though he were uncomfortable with the transformation himself. His hair was neatly combed, his posture different, carrying an authority that had been hidden beneath the maintenance uniform she'd grown so fond of. The board members rose to their feet, applauding, and Richard Whitmore, the outgoing CEO, stepped forward to shake his hand, addressing him not as Daniel the maintenance worker, but as Daniel Whitmore, his own son. Maria's coffee pot nearly slipped from her trembling hands. The room spun slightly as fragments of understanding crashed into place. The unusual insight Daniel had shown about business strategy, his familiarity with the building's every corner, the way certain senior employees had occasionally nodded to him with a respect that seemed disproportionate to his supposed job title. She had been so consumed by her own struggles that she had never questioned why a maintenance worker would speak with such measured intelligence about market trends or organizational psychology. Now the truth assembled itself with humiliating clarity. Daniel had spent the last several months working incognito throughout the company, a decision his father had insisted upon, wanting his son to understand the business from the ground floor before inheriting the responsibility of leading thousands of employees. To see the company through the eyes of the people who kept it running rather than merely the executives who profited from it. Maria felt a wave of shame so intense it nearly buckled her knees. She had cried in front of him, told him her deepest fears and humiliations, allowed herself to be vulnerable with a man she now realized belonged to an entirely different universe than her own. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the carpet, certain that whatever fragile connection they had built was nothing more than a wealthy man's temporary curiosity about how the other half lived, an experience he would discard now that his charade was complete. Daniel's eyes found hers across the room within moments of entering, and instead of the polished, corporate smile he offered the board members, his expression softened into something achingly familiar, something real. He excused himself from the cluster of executives, congratulating him, and walked directly toward her, ignoring the surprised murmurs that followed his movement. Vivian Cross's face transformed through several shades of panic as she realized her treatment of Maria over the past months had been witnessed, in some capacity, by the very man now ascending to the highest position in the company. Daniel stood before Maria, and in front of the entire board, in front of Vivian Cross, in front of everyone who had ever overlooked her or treated her as invisible. He spoke with quiet sincerity, telling her that the months he'd spent working maintenance had taught him more about leadership and humanity than any business degree ever could, but that nothing had taught him more than her. Her resilience, her kindness despite hardship, her refusal to let circumstances make her bitter. He told the room that Maria Santos had treated him with more genuine respect and warmth during his time as a maintenance worker than nearly anyone else in the building, never knowing his true identity, never seeking anything from him, simply offering friendship, because that was who she was. The boardroom remained utterly silent, every executive and board member absorbing this unexpected display of vulnerability from their new CEO. Maria stood frozen, tears threatening to spill despite her best efforts to maintain composure in front of so many powerful strangers. Daniel then revealed something that stunned the room even further, that he intended to restructure how Whitmore Industries treated its support staff and contracted workers, implementing fair wage standards, healthcare benefits extending to contracted employees like catering staff, and a company culture built on respect regardless of position or title. He explained that no one should ever again experience what Maria had experienced under the previous management style, the casual cruelty disguised as professionalism, the assumption that some people's humanity mattered less because of their job description. Vivian Cross resigned from her position within the month, unable to withstand the scrutiny that followed once whispers of her treatment toward Maria spread through the company. Maria, meanwhile, found herself promoted unexpectedly into a newly created position overseeing employee wellness and contractor relations, a role Daniel insisted she was uniquely qualified for, having lived the very experiences the position was designed to address. The salary increase meant her mother's medical bills became manageable, the constant financial terror that had defined Maria's adult life finally beginning to ease. What grew between Maria and Daniel in the months that followed was built on a foundation few relationships ever achieve, having already weathered the test of complete honesty before either of them knew the stakes involved. Daniel had fallen for Maria not despite her circumstances, but because of who she remained within them, her dignity intact despite hardship, her warmth undiminished by struggle. Maria, in turn, learned to trust that Daniel's feelings for her had never been about pity or curiosity, but about genuine recognition of her character, witnessed during the months when he had nothing to offer her but his presence and attention. No wealth, no status, nothing but himself. If this story touched your heart even slightly, if it reminded you that kindness costs nothing yet means everything, that the people we overlook might be carrying entire worlds within them, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs a reminder today that good things still happen to good people, that second chances are real, and that love, genuine love, often arrives disguised in the most unexpected uniforms. Before we close this story, I want to ask you something personal. Please leave a comment below, sharing a moment when someone treated you with unexpected kindness during a difficult time in your life. Because these stories matter, and reading yours might be exactly what someone else needs to see today. Maria Santos eventually opened that small catering business she had once only dreamed about, though now it operated as the official wellness catering partner for Whitmore Industries, serving not just executives in glass boardrooms, but every employee throughout the building, a symbol of the values Daniel had fought to establish. She often thought back to that morning when coffee spilled across a stranger's shirt, how something as small and clumsy as an accident had cracked open a doorway to a life she never could have imagined. One built not on luck or fairy tale circumstance, but on the simple radical act of treating another human being with kindness when she had absolutely nothing to gain from doing so.